Hello LinkedIn, and welcome to a very exciting live Q&A session that we're having today with Thomas KNUDSEN, the Managing Director of Toll Group. I'll briefly introduce Thomas for those of you who don't know him yet. And as you know, he gave a great keynote presentation during the Makers and Movers 2020 last week, and we'll also include some of the questions you had for him last week. So Thomas became Managing Director at Toll Group on 1st of January 2020 after serving for 2 years as Toll's President at Global Forwarding, Toll Global Forwarding. He's leading an ambitious strategy to transform Toll into one of Asia Pacific's leading transport and supply chain companies. He has previously also worked for Maersk before Toll for many, many years. He has more than 25 years within the shipping and transport and logistics industry and has had executive leadership commercial roles across Middle East, North America, Europe, as well as Asia. So Thomas, thanks a lot for taking the time to be with us today also on LinkedIn Live.
Well, thank you for having me.
Super. So before we begin, I want to encourage everybody, as always, for our LinkedIn Lives, comment your questions on the feed, and we will see it, and I will take as many as I can for Thomas, so feel free to do that. It will be our pleasure to answer them as we go. And want to start today, Thomas, firstly with a question a little bit in terms of a biggest challenge that the industry is faced with right now, which is in terms of equipment, lack of containers. There's a serious problem for many routes and lanes. Tell us a little bit about how you see this situation at Toll and what you're doing to help your clients.
Yeah, first of all, I think if you had asked me about 8 months ago whether I thought we would be facing an equipment challenge primarily driven by strong volumes into the USA from China, I would have said you were absolutely crazy, Rado. So it just shows a little bit about the unpredictability of our industry. But it's fair to say that I think equipment has become a key problem, actually a problem that's more impactful than the lack of space in some areas. And we're seeing it across Asia. I don't know whether there is a quick solution to it. Most of the customers that I speak to, the large BCOs, but also when we talk to our carriers and so on, is that this problem will probably continue. And most people that I speak to see this continuing probably till Chinese New Year, and then after that, who knows? And it's impacting all trades, right? I think it started out probably being connected to space also on the Pacific, but what we're seeing now is all trades are impacted, and it seems like the trades where the yields are the lowest is probably also where the biggest problem are for space. So it's happening everywhere. In terms of what are we doing about it? Well, we're probably doing what most other logistics providers are doing too, in terms of trying to get as much visibility to bookings as we can, really engaging with our customers to ensure that bookings are maintained so we don't have downfalls, because that's probably the worst thing with carriers at the moment is if you actually don't deliver on your commitments. So it's a grind, it's a weekly grind of trying to get the right forecasts and communication between carriers and customers and aligning and so on. And it's very specific, right? It's these 4 FFEs out of Bangkok on this date, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a lot of work. But we don't have any magical solutions. I wish we did. But we're certainly trying hard together with our customers to get that forecast and work with the carriers to get space.
And I also want to address the elephant in the room. And we got this question offline. A couple of people have asked it before our live, and I'm sure even today. So there's also been a lot of discussions at Toll Group in terms of mergers, acquisitions, as well as divestments, and you've announced in the press a couple of divestments. So I wanted to give you the floor to maybe speak a little bit about that, as well as the future plans for the group and the strategy.
Yeah, I think over the past couple of months, I've read the newspapers, in particular in Australia, with quite some interest in terms of their speculations about the Toll Group, and there's been a lot of rumors about Toll being sold by Japan Post. Japan Post is the owners of the Toll Group and divesting the entire Toll Group, and that has not been in the cards and has not been discussed. What has been discussed and what we announced 2 weeks ago was that we were going to market with our express business. So our express business is not only a parcels business, it's also an LCL or LTL business, and we have shipped between Melbourne, Tasmania. We have courier services and so on. But that's a business that is primarily Australia and New Zealand centric. And it's a business that has been quite challenged in the past few years. And what we have agreed with the board was to solicit interest from the market to see whether there were any interested buyers, and of course at the right price. So we announced that about 2 weeks ago. We went back to a number of interested parties last week with the initial documents, so people could start looking at the business, and we are expecting to get some feedback before Christmas on the express business. What is important for me is to say that global forwarding and global logistics are not impacted by this, neither in Australia, New Zealand, or the rest of the world. And the vision of Japan Post when they bought Toll, and where this is, I would call an extension of that strategy, was really to build this Asia-centric logistics and supply chain company. And with the express business being very much focused on Australia and New Zealand only, that probably didn't give us the right level of focus outside Australia. Australia is still incredibly important for us. Even if we do sell our express business, still 60% of our revenue is generated in Australia and New Zealand within the forwarding logistics business, with the rest primarily in Asia and some in Europe and North America. But we still remain very strong in Australia, and it's one of our points of differentiation, I would argue, is really our engagement in Australia. But we do want to pivot over time more towards Asia. So we want to maintain and grow Australia, but grow even faster outside Australia. And that goes both for China, it goes for Southeast Asia, it goes for the Indian subcontinent, as well as countries like Japan, where because of our ownership by Japan Post, we feel that we have a very strong value proposition. So I think hopefully we've put some of those rumors to rest now. The future is really global logistics forwarding, Asia, but using what we have in Australia as a base and as a strong capability set within technology and so on. We want to drive that for the rest of the business over the coming years.
Thank you for that. Also, hot topic, and it's probably going to be a hot topic for the next 2-3 years, the vaccine distribution. COVID-19 vaccine is, well, we have 2 for now, many more coming, well, 3 if you count the Russian version, and there's a lot more anyways, but they will pose a lot of challenges in terms of cold chain distribution, last mile. Of course, there's going to be a heck of a challenge for the supply chain professionals out there. Tell us a little bit about about your thoughts also in terms of Toll specifically, if you're preparing some specific product just for this, or how is your approach going to be?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate to be involved in the World Economic Forum. They have a group of supply chain companies that are looking at this and trying to give advice to the members of the World Economic Forum and governments linked to that. And I've had the pleasure of meeting both with the UN and a number of other organizations around this. And I think probably a lot of different angles to this. Number one, people are still struggling with exactly what's going to happen. So which vaccines are going to be produced where and where they're going to be needed and by when. If you look at it, North America, the US is probably going to be manufactured in the US. You're probably going to have manufacturing taking place in Europe, as well as in India and China, as you were hinting at, potentially Russia. So some markets are likely going to be sourced locally. If you take a country like Russia, sourced locally is a broad statement, right? Because there's still 10,000 kilometers to the other end of Russia. So they will need air freight capacity to move freight. But what we really don't understand now is really the connection between manufacturing sites and the parts of the world that doesn't have manufacturing available. So we still need to know where the vaccines will be manufactured before I would say you can have a credible plan. The second part is, of course, the story about how we're going to maintain the temperature of the vaccine. So there are different life cycles of the vaccine. Some say 10 days, some say 20 days, which is clearly a challenge. Some people talking about a temperature between -70 to -80, where very limited equipment exists today in terms of global supply chains and not enough. The forecast, though, is that as the time develops, we shall see more and more vaccines being moved at higher temperatures. So it's probably going to be some moving more at -25, and at some point actually at between 0 and +5, which of course makes life a lot simpler if we can get to that. So it's also a question of when we will see the volumes moving. You know, initially on LinkedIn, there were stories about 8,000 jumbos being needed for this. This is clearly, in my view, not going to happen. We're going to have a much longer and drawn-out process, and we'll have to see how that works. I think the biggest challenge, as you mentioned, is final mile. In particular, in developing countries, that's going to be really hard to get it out to the end consumer. And I don't think anyone has solutions to that. Pfizer I've seen has started developing their own smaller refrigerated containers as one way of doing that. But to scale that on a global level, it will be very, very complex. It'll probably take a year and a half, 2 years, who knows, to actually get a full global rollout. And I do think that most logistics companies have capabilities within this area. And I think what we've shown in logistics and supply chain for many, many years is that we will step up and get the job done. If you look at Toll specifically, we have very strong capabilities in Australia and Singapore, where we support local government programs with vaccines already today on flu and so on. So we're fairly comfortable that we can support that. But there are clearly also countries where we cannot do a lot. We don't have a presence in many areas in Africa and South America and so on. So there'll be others who have to lift that. But I think it'll be a combined effort from many, Radu. The big concerns I hear from many is, what is the impact that this will have on other things? So number one, what will this mean for other vaccines? There are still flu vaccines being needed around the world. There's yellow fever. There's a lot of need for vaccines, and that will not disappear. And then, of course, the second part, depending on where the sourcing will come from, is what's the impact of commercial air freight capacity. So unless we get a significant uptake in belly capacity on passenger flights, we will for sure be short of commercial charter space. And that will have an impact on many of our normal customers. And we're working with them to understand what does that look like, and can we change mode? So can we move more on rail to Europe? Can we do sea air to reduce capacity in certain lanes and so on? And I think that's probably where most commercial customers really have to think over the next couple of months is, how am I going to work if I get my air freight capacity cut, which I think will happen over the next 3, 6, 9 months.
And I'll double click a little bit, because this is, you know, I think this vaccine distribution is going to keep us up at night for a long time, supply chain professionals. I was talking to somebody in India, and they had a government group, strategic group, and they reached the conclusion that with optimism, in the optimistic scenario, it would take them 3 years to vaccinate everybody within India. And that's the optimistic scenario. So it's unlikely that it's going to happen. Okay, India is a pretty huge, the largest population, but there is also the consideration. So one, also talking very practically about Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, the price is $30-35 as far as I understood. That is not going to fly in Asia, most countries in Asia, maybe, you know, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, maybe some of this will be able to afford, but most countries won't be able to afford the price tag in itself. And also, I mean, to your point with 8,000 jumbo jets, unlikely, because again, manufacturing can be localized to a big degree. But I guess the question that I have on that last mile piece is how, and you guys do last mile for certain things, right? I mean, in certain markets, but how would you even approach Vietnam or Thailand or, I don't know, Indonesia, where you have 7,000 islands, from finding the providers, I guess, and vetting them quite fast, and that process, how would that work in practicality?
That's a great question, Radu, and I'm not sure I have the right answer to that. It is one of
the on the spot, but it's you know, something that we all need to address.
No, and even if you could say if it's only half that, then the value of the vaccines is going to be significant, right? So how do you guarantee security of that supply chain? How do you ensure that the product keeps integrity through the entire cold chain, right? Clearly, there seems to be a conclusion that dry ice is one of the ways that we will do that, but there's also apparently a limit on the available dry ice capacity and so on. And as you pointed out, Indonesia is probably one of the hardest places there is with 7,000 islands, and there's a long way from Jakarta. And one of the things we're looking at is, of course, also what can be the role of toll in markets closer to Australia. So you've got quite a number of the Pacific Islands that don't have necessarily a developed infrastructure. And as part of Australia, how can we potentially reach out there? But I'll be frank with you, Rado, that we're thinking hard on how to solve some of these problems. But I think reality is probably that the first 6 months of this is primarily going to be around the wealthy countries around the world and around the big cities and so forth. And therefore, we'll probably have some time to actually develop some of these solutions and some trial and error in the process of how you really move that out. For us in this region, Indonesia is clearly one challenge. China, of course, because of distance, is another one. But Africa and South America are probably going to be some of the most challenging areas just geographically.
No, absolutely. I'm going to take a very interesting question that we got. I'm going to show it here to you on the screen from Andrew Schreiber. Thank you very much, Andrew. How do you see the post-COVID landscape looking like in terms of air freight, reduced passenger capacity, sea freight, current constraints? Also, if I can add the consolidation or not, what will happen in terms of shipping lines, 3PL market becoming more localized versus globalized. So a good question. Thank you, Andrew. And Thomas, what do you think?
Yeah, that's good questions. And perhaps there's a couple of questions in there. So remind me at the end of that. I think if you look out the next couple of years, I think that what's happening now in the sea freight market is a relatively short-term impact in terms of equipment and space. I think we'll get that fixed. I'm pretty comfortable in the beginning of next year. The question is, of course, and I think that's really interesting, which has nothing to do with COVID, whether the consolidation we've seen in container shipping over the past 10 years, whether that's actually changing the dynamics of the industry. If you look at how carriers have managed capacity in the beginning of the peak this year, so already dating back to May, June, and July, where volumes were certainly more constrained, the carriers actually showed more discipline on the Pacific that they've done for a long time. So, the question mark is, has something fundamentally changed? Do we actually see that the carriers are able to manage capacity more? We all had some negative experience in prior years by vessel withdrawals, peak capacity, and so on. So I think what's going to be interesting is to see, with fewer carriers out there over the next 5 years, what will actually change in the industry. And I don't have the crystal ball that's clear on that. But I think COVID, from an ocean freight perspective, I think is probably more 3 to 6 month challenge than anything else. Air freight, I think, is much more fundamental, that until you start bringing back passenger flights, you will be short of belly capacity, and I think that will remain a challenge for the industry.
And wanted to also, we are getting quite a few other comments on the vaccine piece, but I wanted to and I'll come back to it if we have a bit more time. I wanted also to talk about the recent trade agreement that was signed for Asia Pacific, which is a huge win and is the biggest trade agreement in the world. And what do you see as impacts of that to trade and to volumes and to intra-Asia in general?
Yeah, and I think there was something about local sourcing in the previous questions, Rado. And what I think is interesting is there's one thing which is what is in the newspapers. Another one is what's really happening, right? So if you step back a year and you talk about trade war between China and the US and what's the impact of that and transfer of sourcing into Southeast Asia, reality is, if you look at the current peak season on the Pacific, is driven between China and the US, and China trade figures are very strong into the US, and for that sake, many other places. So we haven't seen that the world has changed. I'm certainly aligned with the fact that China plus one, whether that's Vietnam or it's broader Southeast Asia, is happening. So you are seeing some manufacturing from customers moving into Southeast Asia. But I do think the reality is that China managed COVID extremely well and showed the world that they are a very reliable supply chain partner. And I think they've managed through COVID exceptionally well. So has Vietnam. And I think Vietnam has come out flying in terms of manufacturing, but they still have these challenges with infrastructure and now also equipment. So if you're asking, I think over the next couple of years, you will see manufacturing move from China into Southeast Asia. We just did a customer survey, and I was referring to that in my speech last week. And about 1/3 of our customers, we asked a broad spectrum from very small to very large across Asia. 1/3 of our customers were saying that they were going to source more in Vietnam, 1/3 more into India, but also that China remains a key part of their supply chain. So I think that's happening. So that leads me to your question about local sourcing. I'm skeptical around that. If you look at it, I think there will be some local sourcing of individual products, and perhaps the experiences people have had around PPE and so on will drive more of that. Singapore has launched an ambitious strategy of sourcing more food products locally. I think it was 30% in 2030. It's now become 30% in 2023, I think it is. So there is things going on, but Singapore is probably one of the few countries who actually execute on these fancy visions that countries communicate. So my view is that the local sourcing is probably a little bit exaggerated as we come back to a normal supply chain, simply just from the fact that if you have an hourly salary in an emerging market of $1 per hour, and in an established country like Australia, you're paying $25, $30, $40. The balance is just not there for many industries. So will there more be local sourcing? Yes. Will there be more sourcing in Southeast Asia? Yes. But do I think that there will be fundamental changes away from China over the next 5 years? No, I don't.
Yeah, I'll just add here a little bit that I saw, I think a couple of months ago, there was a report saying 70% of the companies are considering moving away or moving some parts of their manufacturing away from China, which I actually had to look twice to make sure that my eyes were not deceiving me. And just to put things into perspective, I'll share a case study with one of our clients, which is one of the top 10 electronics manufacturing companies in the world. And I spoke to the head of manufacturing, and he did say that, yes, indeed, because of the trade wars in the last 12 to 18 months, they had moved about 10% of the capacity, with the manufacturing capacity they had in China, they moved it somewhere else. And that somewhere else was 3 different countries. And those 3 different countries in Southeast Asia barely could cope with that 10%. So it just to
I don't know whether it's just me, but Rado seems to have dropped out a little bit in short term. But I guess the conclusion is that there is a significant shift into Southeast Asia, but not necessarily that Southeast Asia can pick. Oh, Rado, you're back. I don't know whether I lost you or the world lost you, but you were talking about the engagement you had with one of your customers.
Yeah,
around.
sorry, I must have said
Southeast Asia.
I think somebody from the Secret Service just didn't like what I said. Yes, so yeah, I was just trying to make it a bit more practical. That also, to your point, I don't see a huge. There's some shift definitely, but in long term the shift is clear, but it's not going to be radical and it's not going to be short term. I want to ask this question before I have any other issues with my internet, and it's a very good question from Henrik, and this is on the soft skill side, and I think it's super relevant. People, how do you keep them engaged, optimistic, work from home situations, lockdowns, stress? Obviously that all has an impact on all of us. So I guess over to you, Thomas, on how you did it at all. Australia was in a pretty lengthy lockdown, and you can share some.
Yeah. So I think it's a multitude of answers to this question. So one thing, if we just look at the safety aspect of COVID, I think we've managed that really well. To be honest, we probably got a heads up before a lot of others because of our activities in China, and we learned some lessons there that we were able to translate into other markets. So we've gotten off to a really good start. We hadn't had any infections that have moved across in our work sites, despite the fact that we have continued working almost uninterrupted for the past 6 months in Australia. But I do think the biggest question mark right now is probably more about mental health and the impact this is having on people around the world, not just in Australia, not just within TOL, more than it is a security or safety issues for individuals. If it comes more specifically to how have we managed the very difficult communication that's been taking place the last couple of months, we've had some bad press in Australia. A lot of that has focused on either the suggested divestment of TOL, and the second part has really been around some rumors in the news. The rumors in the news were focusing on events and cases that are dating 10, 15 years back and are not representative of the truth. We've tried to engage with media in Australia to clarify that, but have unfortunately not made enough progress on that. We've tried to state our case and really correct some of the factual mistakes that were made. But you know, unfortunately, whatever is stated in the media is hard to retract. When it comes to more general motivating our workforce, and it's a good question, Henrik, I think a couple of things. First of all, really being visible and engaged. We are now running global town halls, which we hadn't done before, on a regular basis. So every quarter, we've had global town halls with 3,000-4,000 attendees on every call to talk about what's going on in the business. We've traditionally had 45 minutes to an hour where people could ask questions. We've had up to 250 questions. We couldn't answer all of them, but we really had more of a dialogue than we've ever had before. So I think, hey Rado, did I lose you? Did you lose me?
I'm here. Don't worry. I'm just bearing with my internet. So.
Okay, but I think I was just saying that I think what we've done is really, because of COVID, we've been forced to engage in a different way with people, and we're doing it now online. We're running global town halls and so on, getting a lot of engagement and dialogue. And we ran one just 2 days after we now announced the last the divestment of Express. And I have to say, I was a little bit worried about how a global town hall with people asking anonymous questions would go. And reality is that we had more than 3,000 people calling in, and 85% of the anonymous feedback we got, we always do a survey that people like what they heard, did they enjoy the engagement and so on. 85% was rated as good, very good, or exceptional. And I think that speaks to the fact that you just have to face people when times are bad and just have the honest conversations. And we had a lot of questions about what was going on, tried to clarify that. We'll run another town hall just before Christmas, and again, people get the chance to ask questions. We do that in the business units and so on. So whilst I really miss the getting out and kicking tires and meeting people on the floor, I think the benefit of being online and doing Zoom calls, team calls, has actually really increased our engagement with the front line. And then the last bit is probably using the opportunity when things are good to also talk about that. So if you look at this half-year announcement we just made, we've improved our working capital by $500 million over the past 6 months. We've turned a loss of $113 million in the first quarter to a positive in the second quarter, and are looking to improve that considerably in the third quarter. So most people want to be part of a winning team, and if you can see that the business is moving in the right direction, then I think in many ways that's perhaps the most positive thing that people in an organization want to see, is that they're in a place that's sustainable and delivers results. So that was a long answer, and I've lost you again, Radu. I don't know whether you are back to ask more questions.
Sorry, this is my internet provider that I will not name has decided to give me headaches. So apologize for everybody. But the only thing is that I lost on my side the question, but I've just received it on WhatsApp. So we have a couple of others.
Okay.
There is one on reverse logistics capabilities. It's a pretty specific question, but I think in the context of well, you have e-commerce and you have a couple of things that are quite important in terms of reverse logistics and returns and all of that. The question goes from Ingo Weidmann. Is Toll continuing to work on improving its reverse logistics capabilities? And as you know, services grow in this area, there might be a lot of potential for growth.
Yeah, so I'll be honest and admit that we're certainly not where we need to be when it comes to e-commerce across all the markets we operate in. But in our core markets, such as Singapore, such as China, and Australia and New Zealand, e-commerce is important, and reverse logistics is becoming even more important. So we are continuing to focus on it. I think it's one of the biggest hassles, frankly, of the industry is the returns and managing that, and in particular if you're doing cross-border e-commerce and getting returns of VAT and so on. So that's a real challenge. I don't know or can't say necessarily that I have any brilliant examples of things that we are doing fundamentally different than we were 6 months ago, to be frank. So I think it's more continuous improvement of returns, but we are certainly seeing some customers growing their overall sales, and that's then also increasing the need for reverse logistics. But I'm struggling to find a specific case where we're doing something really different than we were 6 months ago.
Yeah, because I mean, in all openness, I guess e-commerce has been the major benefactor from what we have experienced in the last couple of months with COVID-19. But at the same time, it's not necessarily easy to completely shift business models when you're also in the middle of a pandemic. So I guess that's the catch-22. But to kind of build also on the point with soft skills and with type of people and capabilities and skill sets, what do you see, Thomas, as the industry needing most or more in the years to come from a logistics supply chain type of skill sets? Maybe hard skills, maybe soft skills.
Yeah, so I think diversity is often pulled out and sometimes for political purposes, but I actually do think diversity is probably one of the critical things. And it's not just a gender conversation in my view, it's much broader than that. It's also representation from the markets where we operate in, so having more local representation. If I look at the skill sets we are missing, and diversity is an important part of that, it's probably technology and data. We've got a lot of people like myself who've been brought up through the last 30 years in the industry and are very familiar with the way things have been done. But when we look at what customers are coming back with now, and if you're looking at, you need to fulfill a customer need within 30 minutes, you can't do that with manual processes. So the whole digital revolution, getting visibility end-to-end of your supply chain, getting customer-focused platforms that handles customer inquiries and product delivery, handling returns as the former questions. You were pointing at and saying some people have really struggled now because they didn't have an online payment process, so they've had to stand up that with external providers and so on. So for me, I think diversity in a much broader sense than just gender, but gender is a really important part of it too, because we have too many old Anglo-Saxon white men like myself, although I'm Danish or Singaporean now, but with a very specific industry background, we need something different. And part of that is technology, it's data, it's different ways of looking at it, and it's being closer to the markets we operate in. And then I think it's collaboration, Rado. It's often been an us and them, and I spoke to that in the speech. I think we need to be much more open and use partners, right? You're very well connected with an infrastructure and a whole group of upstarts that are developing great technology. They sometimes need the access to what I would call real business. So people like Toll, who have thousands and thousands and 100,000s and millions of packages moving on a daily or weekly basis. If we can connect the technology with the physical infrastructure and customer relationships, there's some really interesting stuff. So I think collaboration between customers, suppliers, shipping lines, airlines, and technology providers, upstarts, that whole community. I think that there's much more work to be done.
I need to ask the hard question here on this point of collaboration, because I could not agree more with you. And at the same time, you've been around much longer than I have. I've been around maybe 10 years in this industry. I haven't. There's a lot of talk about collaboration. There's some. I mean, I will not deny. There's some progress. There's some platforms, like let's call TradeLens as one of them, that seems to be getting some speed in terms of aggregating it as an industry. But at the same time, there's this big mentality of, oh, I want to keep my data very close to my chest. I don't even want to share it with my service provider or with my vendor. How, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, but what's your answer? How can we help people maybe a little bit open up their minds and leave aside this kind of let's keep secrets and let's work together for the greater good, I guess, if it's even possible. Maybe I'm just idealistic and it's never going to happen. I don't know.
Well, I certainly hope it's going to happen, Radu, but I think it's also, in all honesty, a fair challenge. I think when COVID started, there was a lot of people talking about this was going to change the landscape. Supply chain heroes were probably in the front line and so on. And a personal pet subject of me there is, if you look 6 months back, truck drivers, pilots, and so on were all essential, and we all praised them for keeping the world going. When did you last see anyone calling out the importance of the frontline workers the last couple of months? I think we're back to business as usual in that respect. And to collaboration, I agree with you. It's actually the same thing. People were talking about how supply chains were changing, how the customers, 3PLs, carriers, and so on had to change the way we approached business. And I think it's fair to say that I'm not necessarily seeing a dramatic shift there. One of the things I would look at, Radu, in that respect is look at the KPIs of supply chain officers and logistics officers in big companies. Have they fundamentally changed over the past 6 months? How do we look at success there? And collaboration for me is when you start looking at end-to-end benefits in the supply chain. So if the view of supply chain success is lowest cost, only speed to market, and so on, then it remains a procurement game, right? We're still seeing a lot of people who are talking about extending payment terms and so on. And that's part of doing business. But I do think the idea of saying, how do you create value end to end in a supply chain? And that means reducing inventories, creating resilience and so on. And sometimes that costs money. And I would argue that we probably haven't done a lot as a whole community between all the different parties to actually change the world dramatically. The conversations we're having with customers are to many extent the same. So I think the industry has to change, and I agree with you. It's not happening as fast as I think it should. But I think it's on all of us to do more in that respect.
And I just also to end, and I'll draw this to a close also, but to end on a positive note, I think the one area where it is happening, and I'm very happy that it is happening, it's on the area of sustainability. And if you look, there's a number of FMCG companies that have come together to invest in sustainable packaging. There's the reality that most of the big brands, for good reasons and for pressure from the public, are having very aggressive goals by 2030 to have a carbon neutral type of goal, and then they will pass this to the service providers, the logistics providers, and so on. And then they have this collaboration has to happen, because otherwise, So maybe let's end on that. Sustainability, big topic. Maybe tell us a little bit also about your thoughts on that, and what you might be doing also at all, and just in general. I know on a personal note, you are very dedicated to the cause as well. So I'd love to, get you speaking on it.
Yeah, and I think that is actually a good point, Rado. It's one of the things where for many years, it was something that people used in the public space as statements about all the work that was done, but I'm not sure whether we actually shifted fundamentally. But that has changed with COVID. That conversation comes up with most of our customers now. And what I think is especially interesting is that it's not just conversations and we want to do better, we want to do more, but actually getting a lot of the infrastructure behind it to work. So one of the things we're exploring in Singapore is significant development of solar. We have a lot of warehouse and space in Singapore, which is not a lot of that in Singapore in general. And we're now looking at, can we bring on solar in these sites? And you can either do it where you own it, or you can have a model where a third party owns the infrastructure, so you don't have to invest the capex, but you still get the financial benefits. We're looking, and this is started recently, right? Can we do more on our distribution fleet in Singapore? Electric vehicles, perhaps link them up to the same solar power and create that infrastructure. And we're getting customers saying, can you do that? What would that look like? So the whole electrification part of it is certainly coming much stronger to the forefront. I think over the past 6 months, we're seeing that in Singapore, we're seeing it in Australia, but also other markets like China. We're having more conversations about recycling of packaging materials, plastics, cardboard, and so on. And there's more capital out there looking for those types of investments. And I think, again, that's encouraging that you actually have people who are willing to put their money where their mouths are. So that's probably one area I was perhaps a little bit pessimistic about collaboration. But to your point, I actually think all these ESG initiatives have really accelerated as part of COVID. And especially on the environment, which you're right, I'm very passionate about, is one area we've really seen improvement.
Super. Well, with that being said, I know we have a lot more questions that came in. What I will do, Thomas, I'll tag you on the LinkedIn, because we're running a little bit out of time. So thank you, Sarah, Memory, Emil, a lot of them, Vikram. We have a lot of people that have commented. So I'll tag Thomas to that, and you can reply offline. With that being said, thanks a lot for your time, for sharing with us today. Thanks for bearing with me, everybody, and apologies for my internet. Thomas, all the best. Good luck in the next month. And, we all need the toll and your help also on the vaccine, as well as in general in logistics. And stay healthy.
Thank you, Rano. Thanks. Appreciate for the chance, and stay healthy, everybody on the call.